Hi, welcome to your lecture on symmetry and viruses. We're going to talk a little bit about symmetry first and then talk mostly about our viruses. So, if you look at the slide that you see right there, on the left you see spherical symmetry. So a sphere is literally shaped like a ball. So anything that has a symmetry of like a basketball or a soccer ball or any type of ball that you can think of has spherical symmetry. Radial symmetry is kind of like a bike tire, where it has that central point and then it has the spokes going out from the all radiating out to the edges. So it's like a pie where you can cut it into these different slices and all of them will be the same. We have bilateral symmetry. If we get cut down the middle, our left side and our right side would be the same. Okay, so that is bilateral symmetry. If you cut something down the middle, the sides are the same. So the ladybug you see has bilateral symmetry. The other type of symmetry is asymmetry. Since it has an A in front of the word, it means it does not have symmetry. So sponges are the simplest animals in the animal kingdom, and they are the only phyla porifera, to have asymmetry or no symmetry at all. When we did our cladogram lab, a lot of you had some phyla porifera or some sponges in your selection of organisms. Viruses are another organism that we're going to talk about, and first we need to know if they're living or non-living. This is debated among scientists around the world, but they do not meet all of the characteristics of life that we talked about before. But they do have some. So they contain genetic material. They either have DNA or RNA. They don't have any organelles, and they cannot reproduce unless they're inside a host cell. The word virus comes from the Greek word for poison, and they cause many diseases. So when you're talking about whether or not they're alive, one of the characteristics of life is the ability to reproduce. Viruses don't have that ability alone. They can only reproduce if they take over the operation of another cell. They have to use the mechanisms within a bacterial cell or an animal cell or a plant cell in order to be able to reproduce. They can't do it on their own. That is one of the reasons why most scientists will consider them to be not alive. So if you were asked on the test if viruses are living or non-living, you are going to put they are non-living. The definition of that may change in the future. Viruses are much, much, much smaller than bacterial cells. If you look at the scale here over to the right, you'll see a plant cell and an animal cell and a bacteria cell. And then over to the left, you're going to start to see viruses. They are very, very tiny, and because of that, we didn't even know about them till about 60 years ago. To put that into perspective, my dad is in his 60s. He has been alive longer than we've known that viruses exist. When we classify viruses, we classify them like we do any other organism, but we classify them based on the type of cells they attack. So how are viruses made? Well, all of them have a central core of DNA or RNA, and they're surrounded by a protein coat called a capsid. So if you look at this picture over here on the left, the capsid is surrounding the protein right here. That is a specific type of virus that attacks bacteria called a bacteriophage. Like we said, viruses are classified based on what they attack, and this one attacks bacteria, so it's called a bacteriophage. This one right here attacks animal cells, so it could be a type of virus that would attack us. The DNA is here in the middle, and it's surrounded by the protein or the capsid. Viruses can't reproduce on their own, but they do reproduce by taking over our cells. There are two different cycles for this. One is the lytic cycle. That is when they inject their DNA into the cell and take over the cellular activities. So once they've injected their DNA into the cell, they take over, and then the cell is there to just reproduce more of the virus and more of the virus. In the lysogenic cycle, they coexist with the cell without destroying the host cell. So they put their DNA into the host cell DNA, but then they just lie dormant. And when that cell reproduces, that viral DNA reproduces with it. Here is a graphic that shows what the lytic cycle looks like. So if you look right here, we're going to start where I'm putting this star. Okay, this is the bacteriophage inserting its DNA into the bacterial cell. The circle in the middle is the circular DNA that bacteria contains. The little red line coming down is the DNA from the bacteria. In the next slide, you can see that that little red piece of DNA from the virus has been inserted into the bacterial DNA. The next one shows that it is just starting to reproduce parts, pieces and parts of the virus, and then it's starting to organize those and build the capsid, have more pieces of DNA, and it's going to just continue to manufacture them and put them together like a factory. Once it's full of viruses, they are going to burst out of the cell, destroying the host cell in the process. So these are going to burst out and then go attack new cells. And in the lysogenic cycle, it's just that bottom portion. The lysogenic cycle, you start by injecting the DNA, it goes into the cell, but then it just stays there. And that bacterial cell will go through binary fission and reproduce, but when it reproduces, it makes a copy of the DNA, and now it's making a copy of the viral DNA too. So that bacterial cell could reproduce many, many times, and then the DNA from the virus can go into the lytic cycle and take over the activity of all of the bacterial cells. There's more than one now. And make you sick very, very quickly because you're producing a lot of virus at one time. RNA viruses are the direct production. They have RNA in their cells instead of DNA. So they direct the production of proteins by the host cell. They are called retroviruses. It's a special type of virus that can make DNA, which will produce new RNA, then in turn makes proteins that produce new viruses. An example of an RNA virus is HIV/AIDS. They start with RNA, and then they make copies of it to produce the DNA. There are many, many diseases caused by viruses to all different organisms. Some of them are listed on this slide. AIDS, measles, hepatitis, chickenpox, smallpox, influenza, including H1N1. So influenza is the flu, H1N1, I don't know if you remember, but a couple years ago we had an outbreak of something called the swine flu, and H1N1 was that. The common cold, also known as the rhinovirus, rhino meaning nose, West Nile, polio, herpes. We don't have a ton of defenses against viruses once you get them. What we do have to protect ourselves are vaccinations. Vaccinations were created to protect you against viruses.